Everyone. We are here for another edition of Operation Gladio meets Secret Society with Warhamster Brady. How are you doing today, Brady?
I am fantastic. Happy one day before Independence Day.
Happy big beautiful bill getting passed day.
Well, it's big. Some of it's beautiful. I don't love it all, but we'll take it because the good parts are absolutely necessary. I mean, they are a big deal. Some of the things they got through are important. So I'm gonna hold my nose at the parts I don't like. Fair enough.
Fair enough.
All right. So
All
we've
right,
got
what do you
to.
got for today?
Oh, this is gonna be fun. We had told the audience that we would be doing like a final skull and bones, just to sum up everything we've gone through. I don't think we're done with Skull and Bones yet. And so I reached out to the colonel in the last couple of days. I said, look, we did not do the Whitney family, did not go into enough depth. And we talk about the families that you don't hear about, that you don't see, they don't make the headlines, but they are the real power behind the throne and maybe the throne itself. And this is the Whitney family, which we talked about like it was our third or fourth episode of this. And we spent about a good 15 minutes on them. They deserve a full 90 minutes. So, and I mean, the more I looked at them, yeah, we just can't let them go without a deeper look. So that's what we're doing today.
We're
Okay.
ready.
Hey, I'm just curious. We're on Rumble Studio today as opposed to StreamYard. Do we see the YouTube chat, or do I need to get that set up? So
I should be able to see it on the live chat.
I will. We'll see if that works. All
Okay.
right. So with no further ado, you know, our whole theory here when we started doing secret societies and got into Skull and Bones is Skull and Bones just this fraternity, that where people know each other and network, or is there something more to it? Or is there a deeper, darker secret, whether it be a cult or otherwise? Are these people that are inside of a group that is elite, different than the rest of us, that pull the levers of power throughout every single aspect of America and maybe the world? Um, yeah, it is working. We can see the YouTube chat. Thank you. And I can even shows YouTube, so I know where it's coming from. This is actually pretty cool. I like Rumble Studios. I don't have to watch the other screen. So the Whitneys are the epitome of that, and I want to play a video. Someone else did a pretty good video on that. Um, I'm just going to play it real quick for about 2-3 minutes, and it'll really give you the overlay of who these people are, and then we'll go into the details, some of the things we missed the first time. So with no further ado, I am going to share screen.
Imagine a dynasty where old Puritan bloodline meets gilded age ambition. A family that didn't just shape America's elite, but helped draw its borders, fund its wars, and even sculpt its culture. The Whitneys weren't just rich, they were royalty in everything but name. From William Collins Whitney, a cunning lawyer who transformed streetcars into a $700 million empire, to Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, who carved her legacy into the walls of the American art world, their name became shorthand for power, privilege, and patronage. But behind the elegant facades and museum wings lies a darker, more elusive truth, one buried beneath layers of political favors, monopolistic deals, and whispered scandals. Ties to the opium trade, covert family rifts, and a legacy of influence so deep it rivals even the Rockefellers and the Delanos. This isn't just a family tree, it's a labyrinth of secrets. Welcome to the hidden history of the Whitney family, where wealth wasn't inherited, it was weaponized. From new money to old money before Silicon Valley minted overnight billionaires and Wall Street carved kings out of hedge fund cowboys, there were the Whitneys, an American dynasty built not on spectacle, but on precision. They weren't plastered on tabloids like the Rockefellers or making reckless headlines like the Vanderbilts. The Whitneys moved differently. They didn't need noise. Their power ran through boardrooms, cultural institutions, and art museums, quiet, calculated, and generational. And what makes them even more fascinating? Most people walk right past their legacy without even knowing it. A Whitney-funded museum here, a foundation there, a racehorse named after a family member. They've become part of the American landscape, woven so seamlessly into its fabric that their presence is felt more than seen. But to understand how they got there, you have to go back, way back. It starts.
Okay. I would say he sounds like he's watched our shows, the narrator.
Yeah.
By the way, that's a channel called The Empire Inside on YouTube, and it's worth. He's got some pretty good stuff out there, so I'd like to give credit for that. I do watch that channel, and he's one of the people that got me started down this particular rabbit trail. So basically, what he's describing is the invisible hand. So he says, "Let's you got to go back, way back." So let's do that. The Whitneys came to America in the Great Puritan Exodus in the 1600s. I am going to show you the Whitney family tree. We'll do it from here. This is on wikitree.com. And the first person we're going to get to is James Scalay Whitney. He's born in 1811. So let's go back further than that and see his father is, well, if you look at the second great grandparents, these are people born in the 1730s. There's Grover Scalay. And once again, you notice his James Scalay Whitney. They combine the mother's maiden name as the middle name. That's what all these old families do over and over again. There's a couple of other interesting names there. The Burgesses, with an unknown. There's an Atherton family, which we've heard of. So these are very old American families. But here on wikitree.com, I can click on Josiah Whitney. And we go all the way back here to John Whitney, who was the first Whitney family in America. And he was born in 1592. And he has Richard Whitney to Richard Whitney again, to another Richard Whitney. And we get back here to Josiah Whitney Jr., Stephen Whitney, and then James Scalay Whitney, and that gets us into the 1800s. Okay, looking at another way of looking at it is a family tree on gwgenianet.org, and that takes us all the way to James Scalay and some of the children, which we'll get into a little bit more. So that's how we trace the lineage. There's a couple good websites to add to your toolkit. So let's talk about the founding father of the family. Shall we? Oops, that's not what I'm looking for. All right, John Whitney, born in 1592 in England, probably Somerset or Dorset in West Country. They don't have really good records of him, so he did not come from nobility. They say he's likely came to America in 1635 as part of the Puritan migration. So that's very, very much founding families of America. The town that I'm in, Portsmouth, New Hampshire right now, last year celebrated its 400th anniversary, which means it was here 11 years before Whitney got here. But this is a real old American history. He's one of the founders of Watertown, Massachusetts, and he got immediately involved as a Puritan, involved in the community, town meetings, and church. And I showed you the family tree, how that went further. The Whitneys didn't do anything really notable for the next, say, 140 years besides spread all over the Northeast. They were everywhere. This family was prolific. What's the word? Proliferate. So yeah, thank you. God, can I buy a vowel? So we get to the Revolutionary War of 1776. Do you think we had any Whitneys involved?
Probably a handful.
More than a handful. We have Captain Samuel Whitney of Fairfield, Connecticut. He was a captain in the Revolutionary War, would die in 1796 at the age of 84. We had a Jonathan Whitney from Mendon, Massachusetts. He was the captain of the 7th Company, 5th Regiment of Hampshire County Militia, active participant in the war, and he would settle in Connecticut. We had a Samuel Whitney from Massachusetts, enlisted in 1775 in Captain Benjamin Flagg's company, You've heard of that. And this is one of the guys that responded to the Lexington alarm. That's the path that I walked earlier or last year. He would end up serving as the private for his father-in-law, Captain Joshua Whitney. I got a question. If your last name is Whitney and your father-in-law's last name is Whitney, is there something interesting going on with that? Sorry, when I was doing the genealogy, I had to ask the question. We had a Micah Whitney, fifth-generation descendant of John Whitney. He served in the war and would settle in Maine. We had a William Whitney from Broome County, New York, recognized by the Daughters of the American Revolution as ancestor number A125404. We had a Moses Whitney, served in Colonel Edmund Finney's 31st Regiment of Foot in 1775, and he is documented in Massachusetts Soldiers and Sailors of Revolutionary War records. That's an official count they have in Massachusetts. We have a Samuel Whitney, born in Weston, Massachusetts. He was a Minuteman during the early parts of the war. You're starting to get the feeling that the Revolutionary War is pretty much the Whitneys against the British. We got a Benjamin Whitney who joined the war at the age of 17 in 1781, and he would settle in Vermont. We had a Case Whitney, and he originally enslaved. This guy's interesting. He was enslaved by Samuel Whitney. It's a black guy, and he escapes to fight in the war, returns to Concord as a free man, kept the last name. And then we get to Josiah, who is the founder of the lineage we're going through. Josiah Whitney was born in 1731 to 1806. He served in the Massachusetts militia. He was associated with what was called the Whitney's Regiment of Militia, aka also known as the Worcester County Militia Regiment, which was active during the Saratoga Campaign of 1777.
So the family had their own regiment?
Apparently. There was enough of them.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's definitely more than a handful.
Yeah. Those are just the ones that I could find. The Whitney family is not really a household name. We know Mount Whitney, and if you're into the arts, you know about the Whitney Museum in New York, but they don't have their name stamped on everything. And like the video said, they've kept a low profile for someone this prominent. But there's Whitneys everywhere, apparently. Of course, we had Eli Whitney with the cotton gin. We talked a little bit about that. So let's talk about James Scollay Whitney. And I've got a picture of him. Oops, I thought I had a picture of him. Here he goes. There's James Scollay Whitney. He is one of the scions of the Whitney family. Why are we looking at him? We touched on him a little bit in the earlier episode, but there's more to him. Born in 1811, died in 1878. So he was alive during the Civil War and in his prime. He was born in South Deerfield, Massachusetts, which was then known as Bloody Brook. His father, Stephen Whitney, was a merchant and a manufacturer, so the family had started to accumulate some money. So, of course, he marries into American nobility. His mother was the second wife. His second wife was a Mary Burgess Whitney. That's the Burgess family we saw earlier in the family tree. The Burgesses can trace their lineage back to the 1630s when Thomas Burgess arrived, and he was a deputy on the Plymouth, Massachusetts General Court. This really is old America. One of the Burgess descendants was pretty famous, a guy named Edward. He designed 3 America's Cup winning yachts from 1885 to 87. So, if you're a yacht designer, you've grown up with a silver spoon in your mouth.
Yeah.
But I bring it up because the family's always been maritime. They had a lot of maritime and trading and ship expertise. So that's why it's notable. But when you build 3 America's Cup winning yachts, you're pretty good.
Correct.
Basically building the fastest boats on the planet. So James Scolay Whitney is the first cousin of a Massachusetts congressman and senator by the name of Henry Dawes. You recognize that name?
I do. The Dawes Plan.
Absolutely. It was the Dawes Act of 1887, which was basically tried to stimulate the assimilation of Native Americans by ending tribal government. And that's the reason the Dawes Act is why it was Dawes Act of 1887 led to us getting Oklahoma as a state in 1907. So that's part of the family. And he was both a congressman and a senator. All right, so back to James Scolay Whitney. 1835, at the age of 24, was elected and commissioned a brigadier general of the 2nd Brigade of the Massachusetts State Militia. Nothing really going on in 1835, right? Militarily?
No, nothing at all.
He would take over, in 1838, he would take over his father's manufacturing business and move it to a place called Conway, Massachusetts, and that is where the Whitney family explodes. That's where it starts, is Conway, Mass. And I'm sure I'm going to have to drive through there just to see how much Whitney architecture is still there. James Scolay is a Jacksonian Democrat. Becomes the town clerk of Conway, 1843 to 52. Today, a town clerk is pretty much a mundane job, right? Back then, you're the one who's putting a stamp on every bit of document for every bit of business that goes through. It's sort of like the postmaster. It's an incredibly influential position. So in 1854, he gets appointed as a superintendent of the Federal Armory at Springfield, Massachusetts by President Franklin Pierce. So this guy's making a lot of money and it's starting to get influential. 1856, he's a delegate to the Democrat National Convention in Cincinnati, where they nominated President Buchanan. In the 1860 election, the one where Lincoln got elected, he was also a DNC convention. That's where Stephen Douglas was nominated. Keep your ear out for the name Stephen Douglas later in the story today. 1860, he gets kicked out of the Armory because Lincoln removes him. And he becomes the collector of customs for the Port of Boston.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there you go. Talk about that.
Well,
yeah.
That is like the pivotal, because if you go back through all of the documentation that we have, one of the very first things when they invade a country like Nicaragua, Guatemala, whatever, they take over the customs house. That's like the very first thing that they do, because everything going in and out of that area is under their thumb. That's the reason why the mafia got all the longshoremen under their control, because they literally control everything, especially back then, by controlling the ports.
Take it a step further. How many of these American fortunes, including Skull and Bones, have made their money with smuggling, particularly opium? Would you not want to
bootleg whiskey, slaves, everything?
So wouldn't that be the person in charge of the port, be a kind of a really big position?
Yes.
So this guy gets that job, and then Lincoln, when he gets elected, removes him because he was a Democrat. So we get through the Civil War. He doesn't do a whole lot. Northern Democrats were opposed to the war. A lot of them got imprisoned, but we're not going to relitigate that today. In 1866, he organizes something called, and remember this name, the Metropolitan Steamship Company. And it basically operates steamship companies between Boston and New York City, and this is big business. He marries a woman by the name of Lorinda Collins, who, of course, is a descendant of Plymouth Governor William Bradford. Do these guys ever marry a common person?
No.
No.
They'd have been disowned.
It's true. So this patriarch of this branch of the family, they have 4 children. Here's where it gets fun. First one is a daughter named Lucy Collins Whitney. She marries a guy by the name of Charles T. Barney. Remember that name. I didn't get a chance to look if it's related to Smith Barney or not, but Charles T. Barney is important. He becomes the president of what's called the Knickerbocker Trust Company. This is a big deal. Are you familiar with it?
No.
Knickerbocker, well, it's because it's not around for a reason. It's a New York City bank that was a central player in the bank panic of 1907. It's chartered by a guy by the name of Frederick Eldridge, who just happened to be a childhood friend and classmate of J.P. Morgan. And what they tried to do in 1907 was they tried to drive up the cost of copper by cornering the market. And millions of dollars of copper get dumped on the market to stop the hostile takeover. Barney goes to J.P. Morgan to ask for help, and J.P. Morgan says no. Stock market, U.S. stock market, then drops 48% over the next 22 months. And this is the crisis that the central bankers and the New York bankers used cited as the need for the Federal Reserve System. Charles T. Barney? Yeah.
That's crazy.
Uh-huh. You know what Charles T. Barney does? Oh, he shot himself. He lost everything. So that's the first child of our the Whitneys, of Mr. Whitney. Second daughter, we've talked about, by the name of Susan Collins Whitney. Well, she's well known because she would marry a guy by the name of Henry F. DeMock. And DeMock was a Skull and Bonesman, class of 1863. Same year that Susan Collins Whitney's brother, William Collins Whitney, who's the star of the show, he was also a Bonesman in 1863. Keeping it in the family, right?
I'm wondering if Susan Collins is related to any of these people.
Namesake at the very least.
Yep.
Well, Susan Collins is from Maine. I mean, that's probably worth a genealogical dive. That's a good question.
Yeah. Yeah.
So do you want to hear about the DeMock family?
Sure.
Guess when they came to America?
When?
Right around 1637 to Massachusetts.
Huh.
Another founding family. So Henry F. DeMock goes to Yale, gets Skull and Bones. Where do you think he went to law school?
Harvard.
Oh, yeah. So his next job, he's a New Yorker, gets a job for the Port of New York as the dock commissioner.
Oh, gosh.
And what's going on, that's 1875 to 1881, right? And in New York City, you've got Tammany Hall and Boss Tweed and a whole political ring.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, the dock commissioner is responsible for all of the city's borrowing and debt. They're supposed to have a $350,000 debt limit, but they started playing fast and furious with New York's bonds and debt. This is DeMock, married into the Whitney family, the scandal-free Whitney family that nobody knows about. And there were tons of accusations of corruption that all got swept under the rug.
Wow.
It's a familiar pattern. These are supposed to be the pure and proper elite families, and when they do have scandal, somehow nobody ever finds out about them until decades later. So DeMock would go on to become a New York line agent in a company called, the Metropolitan Steamship Company, Susan's dad's company. And DeMock becomes a director and a large shareholder. Later on, we're going to skip around the timeline here. In 1890, he would join William Collins Whitney, who's the star of the show, the brother of his wife, and two others to form what's called the New York Loan and Improvement Company. They're basically taking city money and putting it into construction jobs at a huge profit. And those are the ones that built the Washington Heights section of New York City. The steamship that was named after DeMock is the one that would collide with William K. Vanderbilt's yacht. We talked about the Alva and sank her. Case goes all the way to the Supreme Court and found the captain innocent. DeMock's involved in the Boston and Maine Railroad because, of course, he was. He's mentioned prominently as a Society of Mayflower descendants. And he was well known in New York society for holding Box 19 at the Metropolitan Opera So this is the Gilded Age. And this guy's pretty gilded. Last note on him is he was elected a director of the Yale Corporation from 1899 until his death in 1911.
Wow.
This is just the husband of one of the Whitneys. Starting to see some patterns? Familiar
Yes.
ones?
Yes.
Shall I continue, or you just want to?
Yes. No, go ahead.
All right. The next child of James Scolay, Whitney, is his first. Well, the next one we're going to talk about is his first son, a guy by the name of Henry Melville Whitney, and he's worth looking at. So I will show you a picture of him. That's Henry Melville. Very sharp-looking guy, huh?
Yeah.
Well, he's not the star of the show, but he's worth talking about. I think he was. You're gonna find that he was like Robin to his brother's Batman. He's born in 1839. Would die in 1923 in Conway, Massachusetts. He was a banker, not doing anything really particular until the Civil War. War breaks out, and he goes to New York City and gets into the shipping business and becomes an agent of course, the Metropolitan Steamship Company, his father's company. He would establish the West End Railway Company in Boston. 1889, he forms the Whitney Coal Syndicate. What you're going to see about the Whitney family is they didn't take huge bets. They took minority or somewhat majority stakes in multiple businesses, and they played the long game. They planned for dynasty building, probably better than any family in American history. 1893, he helps form something called Dominion Coal Company with his brother William Whitney, DeMock, who we just talked about, his sister's husband, Barney, his other sister's husband, and a guy by the name of Almeric Paget, who we'll talk about later, who would go on to marry William's daughter, Pauline.
They definitely like keeping it in the family.
Yeah, it's getting a little incestuous, isn't it?
Yes.
They also founded something called the New England Gas and Coke Company. That's not Coca-Cola. That's not cocaine. Coke is some kind of a mining ore or something like that. But they did really well getting a lot of ore out of Canada. Again, they diversified their portfolio early on. And that brings us to William Collins Whitney, the star of the show. And we've seen him before, but he's worth showing again. There he is. William Collins Whitney. This is the guy who turned them into a wealthy family, into a dynasty. And died with a very squeaky clean reputation, which we'll get into. So he's born in 1841 in Conway, Mass. Educated at Williston Seminary in East Hampton, Massachusetts. Goes to Yale, Skull and Bones, class of 1863. Where do you think he went to law school?
Harvard.
Of course. 1869, he marries a woman by the name of Flora Payne. Think she's connected?
She has to be.
Of course. She's the daughter of Ohio Senator Henry B. Payne, who was close friends with presidential candidate Stephen Douglas, who was Abraham Lincoln's rival in Illinois. Flora Payne was also the sister of Yale classmate of William Collins Whitney, a guy by the name of Colonel Oliver Hazard Payne, who would go on to become the treasurer of the Standard Oil Company of the Rockefellers.
Oh my gosh. You knew they had to come in somewhere.
Mm-hmm. So she dies in 1893 at the age of 52, and William Collins Whitney remarries. And he doesn't just remarry, he remarries up to a woman named Sybil Edith Randolph, who is a direct descendant of none other than Thomas Jefferson.
Wow.
And what you're doing here is you're marrying an Eastern elite trading mercantilist family with the Southern planter elite. And that's how you create American royalty. And remember, at the same time, you're seeing a lot of these blue blood families of the robber barons are marrying their daughters off to British nobility,
Mm-hmm.
the dollar princesses.
Yes.
So this is consolidation of power through marriage. So William Collins Whitney then moves to New York City and founds, okay, this is 1871, going back a bit. He would found something in New York called the Young Men's Democratic Club. That was the real big opponents of the Tweed ring, the Boss Tweed in New York, the
Mm-hmm.
corrupt. Yeah, so they were fighting against that. And he gets a job, he gets appointed as something called the Corporation Council of New York City, where he codified laws and successfully contested about $20 million in claims from the Boss Tweed regime. He was part of taking down the Tweeds.
That's interesting.
Because other people in the family were involved in the Tweeds too. What I found interesting is this guy's working for New York City as a corporation counsel, so he knows how everything in the city works. He knows every mover, every shaker in New York City. And he's going to use that knowledge to turn it into a bloody fortune.
And I want to add something to what you just said about the dollar princesses.
Yeah.
When I actually did a paid tour of one of the Vanderbilt houses in Rhode Island when we were up there, and they talked about their daughter wanting to marry a guy that she had met that she really had fallen in love with. They locked her in her bedroom for like a year and a half and wouldn't let her out until she agreed to marry who they wanted her to. So this isn't like a fake story. It's like real. You married who you were told to marry.
Yeah, and there's other stories from that age, back in the Gilded Age, where, well, let's say you dated or you wanted to marry the wrong person, or you had scandal. Oh, they would load you up on laudanum, which we'll talk about more later, which is basically opium. They would basically make you a zombie until you came straight. You were not going to embarrass the family.
Correct.
Okay. So in 1883, this is where they kill it. He becomes involved in what's called the Broadway Street Railway franchise, streetcars in New York. And this guy who already knows everybody in New York creates an empire of control. Basically had a monopoly on New York street railway, the whole rail car system, and just killed it. I think the estimate I saw was he made today's equivalent of a $700 million fortune.
Which would be like modern day owning the subway system.
Pretty much.
Yes.
Or the railroads. How a lot of these robber barons had made their money 40 years ago.
Well, I know, but like for common people, use the rail system in the cities back then. Like we use subways. It would literally be like a family owning the entire subway system and monopolizing transportation in a city.
Yeah, there's no motor cars.
Yes.
So we've seen monopolies. These families, a lot of them skull and bones, they've had monopolies in railroads, streetcars, automobile, Ford Foundation, and airplanes.
Yes.
They've monopolized transportation.
Yes. Starting with the shipping, which is where we started today.
Yeah. And we're not done with that by a long shot. So William Collins Whitney, his crown jewel of his empire now is the Metropolitan Street Railway Company. Becomes a juggernaut through relentless campaign of mergers, acquisitions, political maneuvering. Basically had a monopoly on all movement in New York City. In the Gilded Age, when New York City is exploding in wealth because of the robber barons. So we fast forward to 1885, and we'll go back and forth in the time frame because we haven't talked about his steamship stuff because his brother's running the steamship company at this point, but we'll get there. But a guy by the name of Grover Cleveland runs for president in 1885, and Whitney helps him out quite a bit. He likes Grover Cleveland. So much so that Cleveland names him the Secretary of the Navy from 1885 to for the whole first term to like 1889.
And again, that's about control. And you notice that like FDR and many of these people all end up as either the Secretary of Navy or the Assistant Secretary of Navy, because that was the key linchpin to power back in those days.
Yeah, it really was. What's funny is he had no military background. What he did have is a brother who was in the steamship business.
Correct.
So what's he do as Secretary of the Navy? He did a lot to develop what then was the modern Navy. He pushed the idea that the U.S. made ships were equal to foreign made ships. And he gets Cleveland to double the naval budget. And we start getting our ironclads and modern naval guns and plate armor. And he helps create the Naval War College. And they build things like the battleship Maine just in time for the Spanish-American War in 1898.
Imagine that. What incredible timing.
That'll come back. Pretty much we're talking about the guy who invented the military-industrial complex.
Sounds like it. Yep.
Well, because what he's doing, and there's some eyebrows raised at the time, all got swept under the rug. Cleveland would make sure no scandal ever hit his buddy, Whitney. So he'd receive, this is documented decades later, but apparently he received over $500,000, which would be $17 million today, in kickbacks. So contractors for the Navy, people he all knew through his brother in the steamship business, would submit inflated bids, and they'd get back to Whitney through shell companies. And of course, Cleveland would give him political cover. Any heat on Whitney disappears. Anyone sniffing around would be reassigned. Reports disappeared, and his name never gets dragged through the mud. Historians would later call it one of the most efficient systems of institutional graft in U.S. naval history. Example would be the shipyards, and there's a bunch of them there at the time. The ones that were associated with Whitney got 3 times more contracts than the competitors.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So we now have the founding father of the military-industrial complex. Although I will say they were war profiteers going back to the Civil War at least.
Yeah.
So we talked about the scrap metal, all that big business. All right, let's talk about the shipping business, shall we?
Yes.
Well, let's talk about opium. So the Metropolitan Steamship Company had the best ships in the world. They were sleek and fast. They could outpace competitors, and they could escape scrutiny from people that wanted to see what you were hauling. Their manifests of their steamships would show legitimate cargo. Of course, they would also be carrying opium, which would turn into laudanum, which is a combination of opium and alcohol, and that's big business, especially in the 1800s in America. The way they got into it was because the Whitneys and the Russell family started talking. Russell and Company was a huge opium smuggler. Russell and Company is founded in 1818 by William Huntington Russell, or the family of William Huntington Russell. Remember why we mentioned his name early on?
No.
He's the co-founder of Skull and Bones, 1834.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. So Russell, whose family made their money as pirates, who was seeking discreet partners to avoid political scrutiny, so they hook up with the unsinkable Whitney family, and that's how those two teamed up, through Skull and Bones and through opium.
Piracy, Skull and Bones. Piracy, Skull and Bones.
What's the pirate flag?
Skull and Bones.
Seeing a connection?
Yes.
All right. So why were they never caught? Well, the shipping logs were being complete with entire months unaccounted for. Voyages that should take days were taking weeks. The port authorities had records of ships docking with no evidence of any cargo unloading at all. There's a guy, the connector there is a guy by the name of H.B. Coolidge, and I don't know if he's related to Calvin Coolidge, but he would clerk for both Russell and Metro Shipping Lines. The estimates I saw is a pound of opium brought over from China could get you more than 1,600 to 2,000% profit. So this is big business. Where it gets interesting is Russell gets out of the shipping business in 1891, takes his money and goes home. That exact same year, Whitney diversifies into all his other endeavors. A lot of the archives, this back then they kept perfect records of this stuff. So all these records missing is unusual. Like there's vessels that they have 0 records for 20 years. They're just gone. I'd also like to point out, his brother's running the operation, but he's a cabinet member, the Secretary of the Navy. You think he's got access to naval intel?
Absolutely.
So that's our pure blue blood family, the Whitneys, making their money in opium and streetcars.
And ships.
Yeah, where he develops a monopoly, diversifies his investments into Canadian copper and ore. Of course, he got involved with Barney and DeMock in the New York Loan and Improvement Company. Helped Cleveland get renominated in 1892. For those who don't know, Cleveland's just like Donald Trump, who served 2 non-consecutive terms, with another president there in between. 1893, he joins his brother in Dominion Iron and Steel. He's getting politically involved in the Sound Money movement, which is against the free silver agitation of William Jennings Bryan. This is going to cause all kinds of acrimony in the Democrat Party. And he starts investing in horse racing, which will come up again later. The Whitneys are all sportsmen. So he had some children, and we need to talk about them. Because the first one is someone named Harry Payne Whitney, who was a very famous socialite. Went to private school at a place called the Groton School.
Of course.
A lot of the Whitneys went to Groton. You remember that from when we went to the Grotons?
Yes.
Yeah. And of course, he goes from there to Yale. Guess which secret society he was inducted into in 1894?
Skull and Bones.
God, you're so good at guessing this stuff.
I see a pattern.
You do. Goes to Columbia Law, but doesn't finish.
Oh, what happened there?
Well, the family's got so much money, he doesn't want to practice law. He wants to pursue his own, endeavors. And so he gets into business to some degree, but more importantly, gets involved as a sportsman. More importantly, horse breeding, race horse breeding. And the Whitneys have won more Triple Crown races than any other family breeder.
It's also a good place to launder money, by the way, because the horse breeding business is full of mafia.
Yeah, well, funny you'd say that, because Harry Payne had a huge gambling problem to the tune of what is about $100 million. None of it ever made it to the newspapers because the family had so much money. It was like riding off a tip. Henry does get married to a really amazing woman by the name of Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney. Yeah, she's the second daughter of Cornelius Vanderbilt II.
Is that the one that they held in hostage? Because it was one of Cornelius's daughters that they kept in a room. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I know the story. It wasn't this one.
Okay.
Her brother is Alfred Vanderbilt. He's the guy who died on the Lusitania.
Yeah.
But Gertrude was an icon of the early 20th century in the arts and museum scene. So she was a sculptor, considered a leading patron of American art. And what happened was she founded something. Okay, so her husband, Harry Payne, dies in 1930. Do I have a picture of Gertrude? I think I do. She's a big deal. Let's take a look at her. This is pretty much the queen of high society in the 1930s in America. Roaring 20s, 1930s. Great Depression didn't touch her. All right. Having fun yet?
I'm loving this.
So she goes to, she's a sculptor. She's into art. You know, the family's already into what they call charitable work and all this stuff like that. We know how they hide. And the guys at charity, they get the tax-free foundations. This is all going on starting around the 1910s. So she's grown up in that, been married through that. But she's a high society like you wouldn't believe, and she's into the arts. And she wants to push American art. So she goes to the Metropolitan Museum, the biggest, most famous museum in America in New York City, and wants to push American artists. And they snub her. They said, nope, we are obsessed with the old masters from Europe. So Gertrude's not going to take that sitting down. She's a Vanderbilt and a Whitney. So she starts the Whitney Museum of American Art in 1931. It's still standing today. It's one of the places you will see the Whitney name, and it has been a tremendous success for pushing American artists. What's art also used for?
Money laundering.
Yeah.
I also see that her first public commission was Aspiration, a life-size male nude in plaster that appeared in none other than Buffalo, New York.
Buffalo. Really?
Yes.
I didn't get that one.
I love it.
Well, Gertrude also had a dangerous secret. One that nobody. Oh well, the person who was the first director of the Whitney Museum was a woman by the name of Juliana Forrest.
Oh.
They were inseparable. And historians, especially lesbian theory historians, swear that
I remember this story.
Yeah, they were inseparable in public and private. Gertrude would never marry again, but her and Juliana were together forever. And you start reading their family letters, that you see the coded words and innuendo, and you can make a pretty good case that these two had an affair for a long, long time. Now, that would have been scandalous in American high society, and yet none of it ever leaks out. How many newspapers do you have to have influence over to keep something that big from ever getting out?
Every single one of them.
It's amazing. The Whitney family had control over everything. Quietly, discreetly.
Wow.
So they had a few children before he died. One is a Flora Payne Whitney, not too exciting. Another one is a Barbara Vanderbilt Whitney, not too exciting. So what you're going to see here is what we see over and over again with these dynasties is you start getting into like the third generation, and you've got like 20 or 30 heirs and beneficiaries, and they bicker over the estates. Some of them grew up with a silver spoon, don't have a work ethic. These estates start to dwindle, but somehow the Whitneys have done a really good job of staying on top, better than most. And I said it's because the Whitneys planned long term.
And can I just add that it says in here that Flora Payne was the daughter of, and I know you mentioned this, the senator from Ohio, Henry Payne, which because Ohio keeps coming back into the story all the time.
Yeah, where the Rockefellers are from.
And sister to Standard Oil Company magnate.
Mm-hmm.
Flora Payne was.
Yeah, we
So
mentioned
it ties them right together.
Yep.
Okay.
So their son, though, is important because he's a guy by the name of Cornelius Vanderbilt Whitney. With a name like that, do you think he has a difficult time getting a restaurant reservation?
No.
I mean, is there a more noble name in American history than that one?
No.
Where do you think he goes to college?
Yale.
Yeah. I don't see him in Skull and Bones, though.
Interesting.
He becomes the co-founder of a company called the Guarantee Trust Company of New York, which we've talked about before.
Oh my gosh.
He got involved in a lot of mining interests, not just in America, but South America, pretty much internationally. Remember, they're always diversifying their portfolios, natural resources.
And of course, that also ties them to Nelson Rockefeller, because the Rockefellers um, monopolized the mining in South America.
And let's just fast forward to Operation Gladio and the pre-Gladio events. Did we do anything to basically overturn any governments to basically make those mining operations more efficient?
Like every single one.
Yeah. At the behest of the Whitneys and the Rockefellers?
Yes. And so they are really the kind of the, like you said at the beginning, it's the shadow um, entities whose names are not associated with the people that they put out front, that are really the movers and shakers of everything.
Yeah, that's exactly the story I'm trying to tell.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. Okay. What does Cornelius Vanderbilt Whitney do next? Oh, he would back a company to help form something called the Aviation Corporation of America, and his partner in that is none other than William Avery Rockefeller III.
Holy crap.
And this is the Aviation Corporation of America. 1 year later, becomes Pan American World Airways,
Which ties everything together, because that functioned um, before Air America came along and all of those as the transportation of choice for moving opium around.
McModern's asking in the chat, how you doing, buddy? Whether he was in another club. I have not looked. I didn't see a mention of one of the other secret societies, so I don't know the answer. If he comes up in our later research, I will let you know. If anybody finds it, let me know.
Yes.
So we're past Pan Am, right?
Yes.
Well, Cornelius Vanderbilt Whitney also is huge into equine sports, horse racing, big time, even more successful than his uncle. Gets into film production. He was basically the muscle behind Gone with the Wind, the highest grossing film of all time. Doesn't happen without him. He had been born, I don't have the year he was born here. Anyways, he would serve in World War II as a colonel in the Air Force, then becomes Truman's assistant secretary for the Air Force in 1947 to 49, becomes the U.S. Undersecretary of Commerce from 49 to 50, and he became Truman's special envoy in 1950 to the United Kingdom, Luxembourg, Spain, and Italy.
And why is that important in that time frame? Because Operation Gladio is getting off the ground in primarily Italy, but who moved to Spain and set up all the training for the initial cadre of Operation Gladio? Otto Skorzeny.
And this guy is being sent to Luxembourg, of all places, the Prince of Luxembourg, United Kingdom. He's basically there to rub elbows with the other countries' royalty and their elite, because he is Americans' elite.
And Luxembourg is the place where all of the front companies were set up because of their lax money laundering operations, which was critical to getting Operation Gladio off the ground.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I've got another child of William Collins Whitney by the name of Pauline Payne Whitney. We've heard the Payne family before.
Yep.
She's born in 1874. She marries somebody by the name of Almeric Hugh Paget, who we mentioned earlier got involved in businesses with the uncles and cousins and brothers of the Whitney family. Why did she marry him? Oh, he's just the first Baron of Queenborough in England. Yeah, so now they're
Dollar,
marrying. Yeah, they're
dollar,
marrying in. Go ahead.
dollar princess.
Bingo. Yeah, British royalty. The next fun one is William Payne Whitney. Lived from 1876 to 1927. Goes to the Groton School. Where do you think he went to college?
Yale.
What secret societies? What secret society was he part of?
Skull and Bones.
Where do you think he went to law school?
Harvard.
Bingo.
This is really getting very easy.
Yeah, you got an A on that test, but no extra credit. So why is William Payne Whitney well known? Well, he gets on the board of directors of Citibank and the Great Northern Paper Company. And he spends most of his time in philanthropy and sports. But he gets married to a peasant, right?
No.
Oh, no, you're right. He marries Helen Julia Hay. Who is she? Well, she's the daughter of former Secretary of the State, John Hay.
Wow.
John Hay is, you remember the name, right?
I do.
He was Lincoln's actual personal secretary when he was the president of the United States.
Wow.
And then later, oh, interesting note, him and Lincoln would attend the theater together all the time. But for whatever reason, he didn't go the night that Lincoln was assassinated. He did not attend Ford's Theater that night.
Oh, I'm shocked.
Yeah. That's been one of the question marks out there for a long time. They were asking it even back then. Why did Hay not show up that day? He would become a diplomat and befriended someone by the name of Benjamin Disraeli.
Wow.
Yeah, you want to talk about Benjamin, or do you want me to?
You go ahead. But when was he? Was he the secretary of? He was assistant secretary of state. Do we know the dates?
Well, I was going to save that, but go ahead and
Okay. No. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, now you brought it up, so let's do it. Well, let me do Benjamin Disraeli first.
Okay.
Benjamin Disraeli is probably one of the most influential people in England for the entire 19th century. Disraeli was basically the mouthpiece of the Rothschilds.
Yes.
Disraeli was part of the Fabian Society, all of that. Benjamin Disraeli is one of the focal points. When we get a jump across the pond, Disraeli's name is going to be all over the place. And this guy's friends with John Hay. So he's Secretary of State from 1898 to 1905.
Oh, what was happening then?
I don't know, Hawaii, Spanish-American War.
Where we picked up all of our colonial underlings?
So that we could exploit the resources that are owned by the family of the people who his daughter married into their family.
Yes. Those same people.
Yeah.
Philippines, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Hawaii. So this is the guy. And so this is the guy that the guys from Hawaii met and planned out the overthrow of the Queen of Hawaii. Yeah. Okay.
I tell you there's a little bit more than the Whitneys than we covered last time.
Oh. Like an entire mountain underneath the sea?
Yeah, the last thing John Hay did was he's the guy who cleared the way for the building of the Panama Canal.
What?
Yep.
And for people who've been following me for a long time know that story because it encompasses everything that we have learned, because the Nicaraguan canal had already been approved by Congress, and the French had already began digging the Panama Canal while we were going to create the Nicaraguan canal. And Sullivan and Cromwell, John Foster Dulles, and Allen Dulles got involved in the French deal because they went bankrupt. And through a lot of sleight of hands, to include the Secretary of State, they orchestrated a PR campaign to convince Congress that Nicaragua had a volcano that was going to periodically disrupt the canal in Nicaragua through the publishing of a stamp from a PR company, and decided that that was not a good idea, even though we had sank a whole bunch of money already in it, and that we needed to go bail out this French company, that the Sullivan and Cromwell law firm. And of course, Rockefeller owns all of this crap. And oh, by the way, the canal benefits the shipping industry that we just told you the Whitneys are all over.
Yeah, and who owns the steamships? Oops. I'll take it a step further. Remember when we annexed Colombia? Panama from Colombia?
Annexed it?
Well,
Or did we steal it from Colombia?
well, when it was breaking away, the reason that Colombia didn't do anything about it is there's a bunch of U.S. naval ships that were built by William Collins Whitney, standing off the guard. And who was the Secretary of the Navy? Oh, one of his disciples.
Yes. And who was one of the military people that were on those ships? Smedley Butler. War's a racket.
Must read book. Absolutely. If you want to understand this stuff, start there.
Yeah.
Think we're done yet?
No. Keep going.
Okay, we got the Panama Canal. Okay, they had two children, William Payne Whitney. One of them is Joan Whitney Payson. If you're a baseball fan, you know her because she was the first female owner of a Major League Baseball team, the founder of the New York Mets.
Wow.
Yeah, she had to use a lot of political clout to get the Mets to be created in '62 because the Dodgers and Giants had just left New York in 1955 or 57. And they were without a National League team, and half of New York hated the Yankees in the American League. They wanted a National League team. And they loved their Mets because they were not an American League team, baseball. Their other child was a guy by the name of John Hay Whitney. Got the Hay name, got the Whitney name, right?
Yep.
So he's probably, well, let's see, where do you think he went to high school? The Groton School. In 1946, John Hay Whitney would join an organization you might have heard of called the OSS.
Of course he did.
Mm-hmm. Then he would found a company which is now known as the oldest venture capital firm in the United States called J.H. Whitney and Company, using the family money. He pretty much invented venture capital. Would become the U.S. ambassador to the United Kingdom from 1957 to 1961.
1957 to 61. So that's at the tail end of the Eisenhower administration and leading into the JFK. And keep in mind that MI6 is intimately involved in the, as well as the CIA, in the freeing of all of the British colonies in Africa that they are, and we were just going through this last night with the Alpha Warrior show, that they are, including Kenya, that is where Barack Obama's dad came from. And all of this was going on in collusion. So who have we assassinated during that time? Patrice Lumumba. And we have infiltrated all of the African countries that are supposedly getting their freedom in conjunction with MI6, which would have been being ran out of the ambassador's office in the UK.
It's interesting. By the 1970s, John Hay Whitney is considered one of the wealthiest men in the world, believe it or not.
And wouldn't it help to do all that stuff if you had a venture capital fund to be able to hide money?
Well, it's not just hiding money. VC is really good at knowing where the puck's going to be before the puck gets there. And
Yes.
a lot of private money, you get in early, hold it. You know, these long-term investments, and when the gold rush hits, you're there ahead of time.
But understanding that his experience in the OSS means that he has all of the business intel before everybody else does.
Yes, that's the whole point.
Right.
So William Collins Whitney had two more children. One was an Oliver Whitney, born in 1878, died at the age of 5. so it didn't really create a legacy. And the last child, it was Dorothy Payne Whitney, born in 1887, would marry someone named Willard Dickerman Straight. Remember the name Straight for a little bit, okay?
Okay.
I don't know if they divorced or he died, but she would later marry someone named Leonard Knight Elmhurst, and the Elmhursts are not insignificant. So that's pretty much the famous Whitneys before everything got dispersed. I decided to have some fun. I said, Grok, find me, what did I ask it? List some living prominent descendants of William Collins Whitney. So let's show you what they came up with. Because we're not done. This story is never over with the Whitneys. So here's what Grok told us, in no particular order. We had Cornelius Vanderbilt Whitney II, the great-grandson, son of Cornelius Vanderbilt Whitney, and Mary Louise Schroeder. Recognize the Schroeder name?
Yes. That's the Nazi Schroeder Bank that came over to America, right?
Yeah, I think it is.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
His notability, he's a businessman, philanthropist. They're all philanthropists because they care so much about everyone else. He's involved in the thoroughbred horse racing, and the Whitney stable is very famous for breeding some of the greatest horses America's ever seen. We had a Nancy Whitney Marie Leeds Wynkoop. Got a few names in there. The Wyncoops are significant. I knew that one for sure. She's the great-granddaughter, daughter of Flora Miller Biddle and Sidney Francis Biddle. Remember the Biddle family?
Yeah.
Yeah, Nicholas Biddle was the head of the U.S. Central Bank that Jackson tried to close down. They went at it, and the banks almost beat Jackson. Biddle was threatening him openly, the President of the United States. That's that family. Nancy's known as a philanthropist, of course, arts patron involved with the Whitney Museum of American Art. We had Pauline Susan Leeds, and yes, the Leeds family is another one of them. Great-granddaughter and daughter of Olive Lady Bailey and Sir Adrian Bally. Apparently, there's a Sir there, so I guess that's British.
Yes.
Apparently it is, because it's a philanthropist, supports Leeds Castle Foundation, continues family legacy in England. Okay, so that's a transatlantic connection going on. Our royalty marries theirs. And the next two we have are the Straights. I'm going to skip them and go to the bottom one. William Whitney Elmhurst. There's that name again. Grandson and son of Dorothy Payne Whitney and Leonard Knight Elmhurst. Associated with the Darlington Hall Trust. Supported arts, education, and sustainability. Oh, and we're going to look at the Darlington Hall Trust in a second.
Okay.
Remember I told you to remember the Straight name?
Yep.
Well, David Michael is the grandson, son of Michael Whitney Straight and Nina Gore Auchincloss, which means they're related to the Kennedys.
Yes.
There's a mic drop.
Wow.
Likely involved in arts and family trust, ties to the Kennedy family through their mother. Susan Straight was a granddaughter, daughter of Michael Whitney Straight and Nina Gore Auchincloss. All right. Do you want to tell everyone who the Auchincloss is? We've stayed away from a little bit because, well, frankly, Dr. DeProgram has done a ton more research on the Auchinclosses than I ever could, and we don't want to steal her thunder. But we also haven't gotten into some of the other secret societies where the Auchinclosses jump off the page. So we will be talking about them a little bit. But the Auchincloss name is one we keep running into, and they are nobility, without a doubt. So let's talk about Darlington Hall, shall we?
Yes.
Okay. I just went to Wikipedia. It's nothing too exciting. It's a family estate from Devon, England. Historic house and country estate, 1,200 acres, dating from medieval times. Related to Hanfield Hall, Wingfield Manor, all this ancient British money. It's in big estate. You'll see some names. Goes back to the feudal barony of Darlington. Very old money. Goes back to 1384, apparently. And this is just exactly what you'd expect until I know we're going to get there. Oops, I went too far. Go ahead and talk while I'm looking for this, if you don't mind. Here it is. This paragraph needs to be read. This is the Darlington Hall School. It was founded by some of the Strait family. The son of their founders, Michael Strait, also attended the school. Strait would later attend Cambridge and became a speechwriter to Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Wow.
And after the war, the publisher of the New Republic, a magazine which the Whitney family owned.
Wow.
In his memoir, After Long Silence, Strait stated that he had been recruited as a communist agent by Cambridge spy Anthony Blunt, but then he got disillusioned with the party after the war. He was a communist when he was the speechwriter for Franklin D. Roosevelt.
That's interesting.
That's all I've got today.
I think you just left everybody speechless.
Ending on a mic drop.
Yeah, that was definitely a mic drop.
So do you want to sum up what we learned today?
I don't even know where to begin, because it reinforces basically everything that we're talking about. The behind the scenes mechanisms of control, and the control of the shipping lanes, the control of the railroads, the control of the airlines, all modes of transportation. And I say this a lot, that if you know their names, they are not the controllers. And this is, you did a great job of laying out the people behind the scenes that no one ever talks about, because they don't talk about them for a reason.
Yeah, and the Whitneys they've had so much control over all the different elements of society, whether it be the media, politics, you name it, that every single scandal that would touch them got swept under the rug. They weren't audacious and loud like the Rockefellers or the Vanderbilts or the Carnegies, but they were equally as powerful, if not more so.
Yeah.
So I think what we have found is one of the handful of people that sits at the big boy table that controls the shots around the world, maybe even to this day, although the generational dilution may have changed it because we don't know.
Yeah, it would be hard to, obviously, it would be hard to track that, but there's not a lot of things that's changed behind the scenes. The ownership of the kind of, as you pointed out, the minority shares in all of these different entities around the globe, and the moving of institutions in these countries, whether it be England or the United States, to further their expansion and wealth, has obviously been felt throughout the last 200 years, as you just laid out.
Yeah, and now they're tying into dynasties that go back centuries to the European royalty. It's not just English, because the Dutch are there. Oh God, we can go into Ericsson, all that kind of stuff. But these are generational, and this is how the world's run. It is oligarchy. It is aristocracy, and they give us the guise of, all men are created equal, except for us. And you wonder why they have this. These are the people that control the foundations. Generationally, they control the institutions, especially the education ones. And we've showed these same people sit on the Harvard and Yale boards. They control who gets hired, what they teach, what they're brainwashing people with. This is the doctrine that they want taught. And it's shifted over the last 30 or 40 years, this ridiculous globalist woke thing monster. But this is exactly where it's coming from. And you got to ask yourself why.
but also that the woke thing is just the latest um, wealth grab of the sustainability, as we've brought up repeatedly through this. It is just the latest one. The ones that were and doing it behind the guise of capitalism, um, to and the spread of democracy is, to me, what makes the thing the most heinous of it.
Yeah, what they really want, they've always wanted a return to feudalism. People like us that represent the middle class, you know, that think that we can actually compete with them and deserve our own rights. They want serfs. And that's where they're trying to delude us with immigration. That's trying to depopulate us with all that garbage. And, whether it be COVID or other depopulation nonsense. And you can see it in their own writings going back more than a century, all through the 1800s. It all came from things like the Tavistock Institute, the Round Table, you name it. The Council of Foreign Relations, all of that. But these are the people that control it. And I'll bring you back to Catherine Austin Fitts when she was on Tucker. Said she's been following the money a long time. She thinks it's the people that control the Ivy League endowments are the ones really calling the shots. And we just found one of those people. That's the Whitneys.
Yes. Very well said. Okay, so there's another edition of Secret Societies, the Whitney family, and we think that we will be done next time with a roundup, unless Warhamster does some more digging in the meantime and comes across another treasure trove of information. But obviously, this is a very flexible, live, active research project into these entities. And I can't thank you guys enough for being here with us and sharing the information that we provide.
Yeah, I think, well, there's a couple other families that I've been kind of pecking into. The Cabots are going to be something we talk about, whether when we get to the foundations or maybe before that. And the Cabot family.
Yeah.
There's a Cabot Street 2 blocks from here, so they're all over the place. Everything around here is named for one of these people. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, Lafayette Road's the biggest road and longest street in from Marquis de Lafayette, who I happen to love. But yeah, I think next week we'll try to do the big summation, but who knows what happens in the next 7 days. We'll see.
Yeah.
No promises.
Okay, and then we will move on to another major secret society to do a deep dive into that. So again, last words, Brady. What do you got coming up? Do you have some shows?
Yeah, I do. I just yesterday I did we now have I have a live radio show. You don't want to catch on the radio, so I'll be eventually be streaming it. But we're calling it Refederalist Radio, where Douglas V. Gibbs and I look at current events from an original intent constitutional standpoint. And right now, the first episode should be about 3. We're doing something we do annually called we call it SCOTUS Review or SCOTUS Scorecard, where we look at the Supreme Court recent decisions and we give them a letter grade, A through F, based on did they follow the original intent of the Constitution, which is different than how legal scholars would look at things or legal lawyers would look at it. So that's a really fun show. We just did episode 1 of that yesterday, and we'll be doing that every Wednesday live at 2 p.m. Eastern.
And where can they find that?
That's my Rumble channel at War Space Hamster.
Okay. And I have 2 things coming up on Tuesday the 8th. And again, my 4 o'clock is going to be sporadic. We're not doing anything officially tomorrow. I may record something just to have it there to be able to play it about an article that I've been meaning to get to forever and haven't. So if I can find the time tomorrow. But we just checked into Ocean Springs, Mississippi, which is one of my favorite all-time cities along the Gulf Coast. And I absolutely love the city. So we have lots of people to see and things to do while we're here. So, but we will definitely keep in touch. And then we'll be back next week. So thanks, everybody, for joining us.
Cheers.